Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao Ias Academy interview guidance program. So in this present lecture, we will discuss about the antimicrobial resistance in India. So this antimicrobial resistance is also called as AMR, right? So antimicrobial resistance is also termed with the name AMR. So this is very important, and this is a dynamic issue that is continuously in use, and therefore it is very important for your examination point of view. Now specifically, first understand why antimicrobial resistance is in use. So recently a report or study published by the National Center for Disease Control, okay, so this has published a report with respect to the drug usage by the Indian population. So this NCDC study found that over half of nearly 10,000 hospital patients that were being surveyed as part of this particular study were given antibiotics for the prevention rather than to treat the infection. So in the sense that even though the people were not infected with any disease, so they were given antibiotics to prevent any disease that could occur in the future. So this is where the antimicrobial resistance would start developing in the people's bodies. So therefore, in this context, we will understand what is antimicrobial resistance and what are the major causes of antimicrobial resistance and what steps have to be taken and what are the initiatives that were undertaken at the global level and at the national level with respect to antimicrobial resistance. So briefly, antimicrobial resistance essentially means that it is resistance of a microorganism, resistance of a disease causing microorganism. You have to be very careful here. So resistance to a disease causing microorganism, disease causing microorganism to an antibiotic that was originally effective in treating the infections caused by it. So in a simple terms, I will tell you that so antimicrobial resistance is essentially means that resistance of a microorganism. For example, imagine a microorganism so that has been causing a disease in human beings. Okay, so earlier antibiotic is being used to kill this microorganism to treat this disease, So however, with respect to antimicrobial resistance, what happens over a period of time, this particular microorganism develops resistance to the antibiotic. So then even if you use antibiotics, what happens? This organism would not get affected and it continues to cause major diseases among the human beings, and that could lead to the mortality. Among the human beings. Okay, so immunity will not work efficiently with respect to these diseases, and that is how antimicrobial resistance actually work. So in this context, try and understand why India require antibiotic. India need to curb the antibiotic overuse. So one of the reason for such antimicrobial resistance is overuse of this antibiotics. So therefore, in this context, why India needs to curb antibiotic overuse? Firstly, India's bacterial disease burden. So the diseases which are caused by bacteria is highest in the world. So if you look at all the countries, India has the highest burden of bacterial diseases, and in fact a large population suffers from various diseases in the sense that diabetes, heart related ailments, cancer, and making them prone to different other infections also. For example, imagine a patient who have been suffering with the cancer disease, and even if he uses the antibiotics, they may not be effective because of the antimicrobial resistance, because for those antibiotics the already disease causing microorganisms have developed the resistance. So 40% of the children are malnourished and are at a risk of infections. Okay, so since children are malnourished, so over a period of time they require medical care. Now medical care, you have to use antibiotics so to treat malnourished children, and when these antibiotics have become ineffective, then that could lead to the mortality of the children as well. So more and more drug resistant bacteria had started developing with respect to the Indian population. So therefore India need to curb the antibiotic overuse. Right, this is briefly about the antimicrobial resistance. Now try to understand this in a detailed manner. So antimicrobials in the sense that they include antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals, and antiparasitic. So they are medicines. Okay, so these are medicines. Antibiotics, antimicrobials are medicines that are used to prevent or to treat infections in humans, animals, and plants, right? So I hope you're clear about this antimicrobials. So antimicrobials are medicines that are used to prevent and treat infections. So what is the major cause of antimicrobial resistance? We are using these antimicrobials to prevent the diseases rather than to treat the diseases. So that has led to the overuse, of antimicrobials, and that ultimately led to the antimicrobial resistance, right? So this antimicrobial resistance is defined as resistance of the microorganisms to an antimicrobial agent. Okay, so the microorganisms over a period of time develops antimicrobial resistance to this antimicrobial agent to which they were first sensitive in the sense that first they were effective, but over a period of time what happened, they started developing resistance to a particular drug. So microorganisms that develop antimicrobial resistance are sometimes referred to as superbugs. Okay, superbugs is also a term that is frequently talked about with respect to the antimicrobial resistance. So there are certain microorganisms that develop the microbial resistance are often referred or sometimes referred to as the superbugs. Now after that, if you talk about the Indian context, for example, XDR-TB, okay, multi-drug resistant TB, so XDR-TB. Okay, so for TB, tuberculosis disease, the bacteria had developed the resistance to the drugs because of the overuse of the medication for the TB disease, and therefore because of this reason it is very difficult to tackle or to curb TB disease. Now if you talk about the Indian context, the present serious concern is that multiple types of bacteria such as E. coli bacteria and Klebsiella bacteria, Acinetobacter, Staphylococcus aureus, and Enterococcus. So all these are different bacterial types, and they have started developing resistance to some of the largest generations of antibiotics. So this is a major concern that all these types of bacteria have started developing resistance to against the antibiotics. Okay, so this is the major problem with the antibiotic resistance. Now through this infographics we try and understand the antimicrobial resistance in a detailed manner. Okay, so first and foremost, how does the antimicrobial resistance usually spreads? So antimicrobial resistance spreads through following the factors. So antibiotics which are being used on humans, so just using the antibiotics would not lead to the antimicrobial resistance, rather overuse of antimicrobial resistance, overuse of these antibiotics would lead to the antimicrobial resistance. So after that, if we overuse antibiotics on animals and livestock, because ultimately we depend on animals and livestock for our diet, so therefore overuse of antibiotics in animals and livestock would also leads to the antimicrobial resistance. So antibiotics even pollute the environment. For example, the industrial effluents, so they pollute the water, and they even pollute the soil. So I hope you know about the biomagnification and bioaccumulation. So through biomagnification and bioaccumulation also there's a problem of antimicrobial resistance, because these chemicals the resistance would starts developing among human beings from one trophic level to other trophic level. They start accumulating and magnifying as well. So after that, import of livestock and food would also cause antimicrobial resistance, and travel would also lead to the antimicrobial resistance. So through these factors, antimicrobial resistance spreads from one part to another part. So however, how can we how can this antimicrobial resistance be prevented? So there are different steps through which this antimicrobial resistance can be prevented, right? So they include health system performance, okay, so a good medical care, a good medical treatment, medical infrastructure, and clean food and water, responsible use of antibiotics, so not to using too many antibiotics, don't use the antibiotics without prescription, etc. So after that, the vaccination is also another important method, and communication on health issues, and hand and kitchen hygiene. So all these factors are very important, so they can be effective methods for the prevention of this antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so however, if you look at India's case, India carries one of the largest burden of drug resistant pathogens worldwide. So therefore, India had been facing the problem of this antimicrobial resistance. Now try to understand this causes of antimicrobial resistance in a detailed manner. So what are the major causes? So first and foremost, indiscriminate usage of this antibiotics is one of the reason for this AMR. Okay, for example, inappropriate use of antibiotics. So inappropriate use in the sense that, for example, you use antibiotics without prescription, and you have been using this antibiotics to prevent a disease. So in that case, there's a chances that the antimicrobial resistance would develop in your body. Okay, so that is the major reason. So after that, there's a lack of research in India. For example, sophisticated research ensures that targeted section of people, targeted drugs, and that could significantly reduce the burden of antimicrobial resistance in a countries like India. However, the problem with India is lack of enough funding for the research in this particular sector, and that has lead to the inadequate laboratory facilities. So if we have adequate laboratory facilities, we could inform the clinicians rapidly about what would be the appropriate antibiotic with respect to different bacterial infections. So after that, the lack of capacity building is also a major problem with respect to the AMR, or major cause of AMR, because lack of adequate training in antibiotic selection, whether it is clinicians or or doctors or medical professionals, there is a lack of adequate training to on which antibiotic, on which appropriate doses should be used, is another major problem with respect to the AMR. So after that, lack of regulation also. The regulation is considered as skewed, and regulation is also considered as complex. Okay, so there's lack of effective center state cooperation, and that has made that there's a AMR problem that is being developed in the Indian populations. So inadequate monitoring of the antimicrobial resistance and control of antibiotic and dispensing practices by health systems, in spite of repeated warnings, is the major cause of this antimicrobial resistance. In a similar sense, developing of superbugs. So what is a superbug? Superbug in the sense that, for example, developing microorganisms. So microorganism developing antimicrobial resistance to a particular antibiotic, so that is considered as superbugs. So inappropriate use of these antibiotics and other molecules used to treat or prevent infections on humans, animal, and agriculture sectors, so generate bugs, so they are resistant to different drugs. So these superbugs are essentially resistant to different drugs. So it essentially means that when you use these drugs or medication against these superbugs, so those medications would be largely ineffective. So after that, improper sanitation is another major problem, so that could lead to the spread of superbugs. So however, we can say that India had made a rapid strides in this front, in terms of sanitation, because so India had launched this Swachh Bharat program, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. And as part of this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, we have made the rapid strides in sanitation front as well. So therefore, this could prevent the spread of super bugs. And after that, there's a lack of support on this front as well. So lack of support in the sense that antimicrobial resistance is very often considered as a complex socio-economic and the political challenge. Okay, so it is not just the scientific matter, rather it is a socio-economic and the political challenge, and therefore it requires the support from the multiple stakeholders. That includes pharmaceutical industry and awareness that is being generated among the parents, the government and the civil society. So everyone need to be aware about the usage of these antibiotics and the dangers of antimicrobial resistance. So speedy treatment is also another factor that had to be kept in mind. So speedy treatment in the sense that it prevents the chronic use of these antibiotics or regular long-term use of antibiotics. So when you don't use these antibiotics for the longer periods of time, there are chances that AMR would not develop, antimicrobial resistance would not develop, and the drugs would be more effective for the diseases. And after that, India had actually lacks the infrastructure in the sense that the laboratory infrastructure. So these laboratories can speed up the patient's investigation, and therefore they could find out the correct prescription of various antibiotics. So that could also significantly reduce the antimicrobial resistance problem. So in this context, we will briefly understand the way forward as well with respect to antimicrobial resistance. So what should be done, or what are the steps or the measures that should be taken with respect to this? So first and foremost, we need to promote research and development. We need to spend more on R&D and developing, further revamping the existing laboratory infrastructure, so that could come up with important insights with respect to antimicrobial resistance, and thereby India could leapfrog itself in reducing the AMR problem. And there should be a holistic approach as well. So holistic approach in the sense that when we are looking at the antimicrobial resistance, so we should also look at the governance structure, infrastructure, sanitation, poverty, and access to clean drinking water. So all these areas have to be taken into consideration when we are planning to curb the antimicrobial resistance, because antimicrobial resistance is not independent of these factors. So it is very often comes up with these factors as well. So after that, the patient specific safety measures should also be taken. Okay, so ensuring sanitation in hospitals and basic access to personal hygiene and infection control are very important, because when you control the infections, you no longer use the antibiotics, or even using antibiotics for the treating a particular disease or preventing a particular disease. And there are certain infections which are chronic in nature, so try to prevent those chronic diseases. For example, TB is considered as a chronic disease. So therefore, chronic diseases, what generally happens, that you need to use these drugs for the longer periods of time, and that could lead to the antimicrobial resistance for these drugs. So therefore, you need to focus on infection prevention of various chronic diseases. So however, we briefly talk about certain steps so that were taken at the global level as well as Indian level, certain initiatives that were taken to control the antimicrobial resistance. So first and foremost, there was a global action plan on AMR. So this was launched, a global action plan on antimicrobial resistance. So this global action plan on antimicrobial resistance is committed to the development and implementation of a multi-sectoral national action plans. So there would be multi-sectoral national level action plans, and this was launched in the World Health Assembly in 2015. So after that, World Antibiotic Awareness Week also launched. So this World Antibiotic Awareness Week is actually considered as a global campaign that aims to raise the awareness of AMR worldwide. So global antimicrobial resistance and use surveillance, so that is considered as GLASS. So this was launched by WHO in the year 2015. This particularly strengthens the AMR surveillance in India. And after that, the Muscat Ministerial Manifesto. So it has 3 goals. So Muscat Ministerial Conference has 3 goals. So what are those 3 goals? So it protects the efficacy of antimicrobials and curb the development of AMR worldwide, and reduce environmental pollution and lower the spread of AMR. So these are the basic objectives of Muscat Ministerial Manifesto. And after that, with respect to India, at the global level, there was also another program called AWARE. So that is Access, Watch and Reserve. So this is considered as the initiative of the WHO, and that takes into account the impact of different antibiotics on human health. Now, if you understand, most of these initiatives were undertaken with the WHO as a center or as a coordinating agency for the attempts to control the antimicrobial resistance. However, India had also launched certain programs with respect to antimicrobial resistance. First and foremost, India's National Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistance for 2017 and 2021. Okay, so it actually addresses 6 critical issues. Okay, so this focuses on 6 critical issues. Now the country is in the process of updating this National Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistance, so for the period of 2022 to 2026. So through extensive consultative process. Now, consultative process in the sense that involving all the stakeholders and considering it as a holistic approach. So earlier we talked about this holistic approach. Holistic approach involves all the relevant stakeholders, for example, pharmaceutical industry, civil society, state governments, and NGOs which are working on this front, and also different other universities and research centers. Okay, so that is considered as a holistic approach. So One Health Consortium was also construed for this purpose. This is country's first One Health Consortium, so that particularly enhances the medical surveillance. So Delhi Declaration on Antimicrobial Resistance. Okay, so this Delhi Declaration is a multi-sectoral initiative to recognize the emergence and spread of antimicrobial resistance and to adapt a collaborative approach for preventing the antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so these are the major initiatives that were launched by the government of India for preventing the antimicrobial resistance. So this is what is all about the antimicrobial resistance. However, it is very clear that a country like India with a huge population, there's a need to work on reducing or curbing the overuse of these antibiotics, because that could lead to a disaster, because that could increases the mortality of our population if this antimicrobial resistance starts increasing. So therefore, India needs to urgently prioritize this issue in order to curb the antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so that's all in this lecture, and thank you.